If you were to do it all over again, would Latin America be the continent of choice?
Well, I'm a big fan of Africa as a speculator, as a kind of an entrepreneur, as it were, a political entrepreneur. Everything's so politicized there. You know, because I've lived in, I don't know, 10, 11, 12 countries. I could count them up. And I visited 160, most numerous times. Basically been living outside of the U.S., living in the United States, out of the United States for the last 40 years. So would I go back to Latin America? Well, what are your alternatives? I mean, that's why, I kind of got into the hobby that I have that's related to this, which is visiting shithole countries and getting an appointment with the president or the military dictator. Or
How do you
is.
do that?
It's
For the viewers who want to get an appointment also.
Well, it's not easy if you're just a gulag off the street. But I'm fortunate over the years because I've written a lot and I've spoken a lot and I've played polo, no longer do, but I played polo for 20 years. You say, okay, so what? I play golf, I play tennis. That's good. But polo is kind of a special sport. And in any country in the world where they play it, I go to the polo club, I'm automatically one of the boys of, because these are the rich guys in the country.
It's not exactly a low level.
Exactly. And so you meet somebody, you talk to them, and you go home to dinner, you meet friends, and it's pretty easy in these countries.
Well, easier than meeting the president of the United States or something like that.
Yeah.
The guy's just hanging around, right? So you're going
exactly.
to these countries.
And there's always, like for instance, I'm very interested in art, painting, and sculpture. So that's something that people in these countries that are connected do. Go there, one thing leads to another. I mean, it used to be, I don't do this anymore, but I'd wander into the capital city of someplace, don't know anybody, don't know anything. So I would open up the Yellow Pages and do two things. I'd go to lawyers because they know everybody, they're absolutely wired if you go to the right law firm, and I'd interview a bunch of lawyers. They're happy to talk to you. Who knows, I might be a rich guy that can give them business.
Just throw them a retainer, perhaps?
No, not necessarily.
Don't even hire them.
No, I'm interviewing them to hire them. And if we get along, then one thing leads to another. And I thought, in Dominica, for instance, this is kind of an interesting story. I went there during the 70s sometimes, okay? And I met with this one lawyer, and we got along very well, just chatting. We liked each other. And I was telling him about what I did and what I thought. And he said to me, Mr. Casey, you ought to meet my brother Kenny. He's the director of the Industrial Development Bank. Little country, 60,000 people, has an industrial development bank. It's kind of quaint. So he sets up a dinner for me with his brother that night. And there we are in the restaurant. And we're talking. And Kenny's kind of suspicious of me because it's a black country. And I'm a white guy. I might be a Uhuru jumper. And so we're blah, blah, blah talking. And this is where I really hatched the plan that became the centerpiece of my hobby of talking to guys that ran countries. And I told them about my radical plan, which I'd never pitched to a government before, of how they could basically turn their nothing nowhere country into Hong Kong on steroids very quickly. And what it would do is enrich every common man in the country, because we take all of the government's possessions. They had lots of crown land. All these things would be put into a corporation and run for profit. But the shares would be distributed 70% to every man, woman, and child in the country. So they all profit from it at that point. And I was thinking, well, 10% would be put in trust for the next generation so that people born in the next 21 years would also have an interest in it. And 15%, let's say, would be distributed to people that make things happen. So I said to Kenny, that 15%, that might go to people like yourself, for instance. And I said, when we take, with the last 5%, when we take it public in New York, London, and Tokyo, there'll be warrants attached and warrants given out to people that are making things happen. And let's suppose that the stock goes public at $10, but you might have 1 million warrants at a penny. And I'm hoping that since he's the director of the industrial, he can do the math. He thought about it for 10 minutes, and he came back and he said, and this is one of those things that somebody said that's burned into your mind. He said, that's very interesting, Mr. Casey. Tell me more about those warrants. So I did, and I explained what we'd do. 10 minutes later, he went off and he called Eugenia Charles, who was the president of the country at that time. Remember, I was new in that country yesterday. He called Mrs. Charles, who became famous, incidentally, when the U.S. invaded Grenada. So he went off and he called Mrs. Charles and set up an appointment for me with her the next morning. He set the appointment up, and then it turned out her father, who was very sick, died that evening. And of course she had to cancel all of her appointments. And like an idiot, I should have just camped out until the funeral was over and gotten the appointment. But since it was a spur of the moment thing, I said, I'll come back. Then I thought about it. I said, wait a minute, let's cookie cutter this mother and take the show on the road. And then I did this in 10 other countries, never with success, always with really interesting consequences.